early days myself. I don't remember what it was like, but was there a temple that you lived in those very, very early days? Where did you all live?
In the very early days, I didn't live in the temple because I was a married man and I lived nearby. But the first temple had a few people living there. They were single men mostly, and yeah, there were very elaborate living facilities in any of the early temples. There was 26 Second Avenue, and then later on, I don't know. I went to London and just lived in kind of a ramshackle place.
Yeah, fairy place, was it?
Yeah.
And that Matchless Gift, was that actually a temple where?
Yeah, Matchless Gifts was 26 Second Avenue. That was the first temple. Right. Prabhupada didn't live there himself. He lived in that same building in the back. There was a courtyard and a flat, one flight up. So he lived there. And some people lived in the temple. It was kind of like about half the size of this room, something like that. And people were all sleeping on the floor. Yeah. That's where they lived. In those days. So that was the first temple, 26 Second Avenue, Matchless Gifts.
I have a question.
Yes? Hare Krishna.
When you first met Prabhupada, when you first came across him, what captivated you? Can you remember when you first met him, what really?
Well, where I first met him was in the Bowery, that part of the Skid Row part of New York, or Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. And it was a very fashionable place at one time. The Bowery, it's kind of comes from the word bower, like a place of flowers. That's your sort of a retreat place. So you're sheltered by twigs and flowers and stems and leaves. But anyway, it became a Skid Row, and that's where he started out. I mean, more or less. That was his own first place that was his own place, and it wasn't completely his own. He was sharing it with an 18-year-old boy, but it was 4 flights up, and it was what they called an artist in residence place, AIR, and that sign was on the front of the door on the top, and that's where he started his lectures. And someone told me about this place. There was no temple then, just an elderly man, and it was very dark and about this, a little bit bigger than this place, maybe twice as long and thin, and very ramshackle. Ceiling was there was no cladding. There was just bare beams and big cobwebs, and it was very dark. And that's how we started out. And I kind of got the impression that he was a very elderly, kind of a holy man type of thing, and very paternal, very grandfatherly, and very joyful. So that was the first impression I had. And then he was, not only a scholar, but a very dedicated to what he was doing. And I thought that anyone who could live in that sort of situation is probably the genuine article. That's the first impression I had. Yes?
I'm new to Krishna consciousness, but he was saying that he thought if Krishna wanted to come back to Earth, he would. Is that part of Krishna's philosophy, that Krishna is going to come back to Earth?
Back to Earth?
Yeah, or manifested in a human form, or I'm just wondering.
Well, I suppose that part of the Krishna conscious philosophy is that if a person attains perfection, they can go to the spiritual world, and if they don't attain complete perfection, come back to the material world. It's just a matter of how purified the heart becomes. Krishna conscious philosophy. But most people don't attain perfection in this life, so they have to come back as something, as a human being, or less than a human being, or a little bit greater than a human being, or a very successful human being. That it's all about karma, really. I mean, we're getting into the of the philosophy, but it's kind of like about karma.
Yeah.
Okay, any others? Thoughts? Yes?
I thought, just to clarify, there's that moment in the movie where you've just gone to London, and I think it's Mukunda is speaking and saying how when you got there, everyone was quite outrageous, and you had to do something to be different. And then they showed him shaking their head. And actually, I was at the Prasadam hall, somebody asked that exact question: why the Hare Krishnas have shaking heads?
Well, it wasn't exactly that we wanted to be noticed, but the people of England. I'm an American. I was born in Oregon. They're very kind of open-minded, but they didn't express a lot of animosity or hatred. They just sort of buried themselves in their newspapers or whatever and pretended that they didn't notice us. But we were pretty noticed because of what we did, and it did have an effect of people noticing us more. And when we went out and did chanting, they noticed us more. And then at a certain point, we had to abandon preaching to the people from India because they liked it very much. And it was almost like, but in a way, it was like not completely successful because they thought that they knew better, or it was their religion. So Prabhupada wrote to us and he said it's more important to speak to the English people. And so we started the next day, started going to universities, and the response was dramatic. It was, they were really enthusiastic and dancing and chanting, and much more than the Indian population. Much more. Yes?
The point where you found that you wanted to surrender or commit, dedicate your life?
Well, I was sort of in the very beginning when I met Prabhupada. I feel that I had to help him, because preaching in this loft sort of situation, is this kind of crummy, ramshackle place in the Bowery, wasn't really very suitable. But I think it was the third meeting or third meeting that I understood he brought some books with him, and he had been lecturing from a big book of Srimad Bhagavatam, I think it was, in Sanskrit, and. But he had copies of this book that he came with from the United States, from India to the United States with, and I started reading those books, and because I knew the author, I knew him, and I just was very intrigued by the books. And obviously the books were not written by people who knew the English language, because some of the letters were upside down in the linotype. But the message was still getting across to me, and I just, in that first day or two, I thought, well, I found what was the most convincing explanation of the reality of life. And I was just constantly reading those books, and I felt, because I'd met the author and I had the books, that there was nothing more to do. I just read books from morning till night. But I didn't really get into the missionary spirit for a couple of years. It was more of like a fun adventure, because I was with my friends, and it was kind of enjoyable. Even though it was austere, there was something about it that kept me going. It was really fun. Yes?
Is there any time when you first started studying with him to now that you ever doubted his religion?
There were times when it was so difficult that I just wondered, how am I going to carry on? But I didn't doubt the philosophy. But I just wondered if I was out in the cold or changing a tire or something like that, or in a real broken down situation, why was I doing all this? What was it for? And then but I just kept going. But I didn't doubt the philosophy, if that's what you were asking. I just didn't want to be part of the sort of world at large. Yes?
When we were watching the film, we really got a sort of vision of what it was like in the 60s, and people were really searching and looking, and even Prabhupada acknowledged the fact that these were, actually, he couldn't blame them. He's acknowledging the fact that they were distrustful of the system and really searching for something else.
Well, yeah. I suppose in the United States there was a lot of opposition because it was different. We were really looked different and acted different, and anything that's different in that world is suspect. And so there was a big sort of conflict going on. Well, some sociologists say that that was the time of rebellion, at the time of people really searching for new values in life, and that was the appropriate time for Krishna consciousness to take hold. And it was actually true. Young people had become very sort of disenchanted with the system, and but the system. So that's where the started. There was a lot of enthusiasm in those days because people were sort of searching for a new and better way of life.
People nowadays still search it though. Are there searches as much as it was in the 60s?
Well, in those days, I think there were a lot of what probably called hippies and people that were really actively looking for something, and I suppose there are people like that nowadays, but it was of a way of movement. There were a lot of people that were sort of like San Francisco became a mecca for dropouts and homeless people and all that, and it like a typical American scene, a lot of conflict on anything that was very new and different. It becomes very suspect. And the Krishna consciousness wasn't the first movement that had to experience that. The Mormons had a lot of difficulty. Of course, they believed in polygamy and that sort of thing, but there were some. I think the founders of that movement were actually murdered in opposition to anything that was different. Even if it was Christian, didn't matter what it was. There was a lot of opposition to anything that was radically different. Anyway, it doesn't happen here. Yes?
I was just thinking about imagining the prasadam scene, Srila Prabhupada cooking, and how that would have been such a major attraction for people who were just coming in off the street. And
yeah.
He was cooking for them, and they were sitting down, and he was just feeding them. And I mean, that would have been like life-changing for...
Yeah, he was always emphasizing the importance of prasadam, of food, and there was a time when in Berry Place, I mean, it was right in the heart of England, of London. I mean, it was almost in the geographic center. But the people that lived on that block, and their walls were made out of brick. And because we spiced the food in a certain way, they thought that we were performing witchcraft. And ultimately, there was so much that we had to leave that place. But they thought we were performing witchcraft because they started thing. This would go through the brick walls. And chilies and peppers or whatever it was, it does go through brick walls. And because they were coughing and complaining, they ultimately, they were spying on us. They had even people that were on the roof with cameras like his. People were living in the building because it was all... Anyway, that's part of the dark history of what happened. But anyway, I think the food was always there. I mean, even in the very beginning, Prabhupada used to distribute some fruit at the end of every talk. So that was a big part of everything. Sometimes the movement is called the kitchen religion because of that.
During the movie, there's the point when you after recording the album with George Harrison, and then you guys started like a rock band, and you guys became quite famous in that time. You had shows where there were lots of people coming to the shows and concerts that you guys would perform?
Yeah, we kind of experienced the sleazy side of being rock stars. We went to nightclubs, and sometimes we had to wait in kitchens where they were cooking meat, and it was a little difficult. But some of the venues were more like concert halls, and there were famous people that we were billed with, and we kind of didn't know what it was like. But when sometimes we pulled into petrol stations, the attendants for autographs they said it's not for me, it's for my children, because we were famous, we were on television. And as I look back on it, it seems like we could have taken more advantage of that popularity. But anyway.
Did you perform at concerts? And like
Yeah, there are a lot of concert venues. What happened was the talent agencies started to approach us that we'll get you this and that, and you can make like $400 or $500 or pounds at every venue. So it was a way that we actually took their offer and supported the temple that way. That was how we did it. And even when we went to Europe, other countries like Germany and France and Sweden, it was kind of financially motivated. And we went to all these places just to make money to pay the rent of the temple. So there was the sleazy side of being a rock star.
is there any footage of that?
Of what? Of footage?
The rock concert?
Well, somewhere there is footage of it. But the one that was most bizarre was in Sweden. There's a place called Linköping, Sweden. It's on the southern tip of Sweden, not Stockholm, but even further south, the very southern part of Sweden. And it was called the Festival of the Midnight Sun. It took place on the 21st of January, where the sun doesn't ever set. And what happened is that there were about 20 different rock and roll groups that were flown from London to that place, and it was put on by a well-to-do person from Mexico, and so we had to chant and dance on a stage, and it was really high up. And what they didn't see in those days, they had speakers that twirled around inside of cases. They called them Leslie speakers. And because we were chanting and dancing and jumping, the platform started to vibrate up and down, and the speakers started making crashing sounds, like the things that were spinning around inside the cases were hitting the sides, and they sounded like explosions. And the people that were watching all thought it was part of our act, and they began to applaud. So that's just part of what happened. And then we went all over the place, as all over Europe and all over the country of England as rock stars, and even famous bands that we were with. We didn't even know who they were. They were famous though. Anyway, that's the end of that story. So.
Was it also that time when you met the people?
Pardon? Was it that time? It was 1969 in September when the Hare Krishna mantra was released by Apple Records, and Prabhupada wanted to know what it was all about, because he arrived in London right at the same time that record came out, and when we informed him that it sold 70,000 copies the first day, his eyes opened very wide, and he said, "Oh, it's very big business." And it all happened about that time, and that's when we became sort of like famous. I mean, it was in Manchester, England. There was a group. There was a team called Manchester United, a very famous football team, Manchester United, and in the stadium they would play the Hare Krishna mantra on speakers, because they would broadcast the hits of the day, whatever they were. And since the Hare Krishna mantra only had 3 words in it, everyone started singing along with it. All these drunken football fans were chanting, 6,000 of them, 60 or 70 or 80,000. They were chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Drunken football fans. So that's what happens. Anyway, thank you for listening and watching, and Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Okay.
Someone got hold of it that they had to do a critique on the movie, and she asked me if you can watch it with me. It's a secret, and it was very, very different.
Really?
It was very different. Like he must have cut it. Must have got a bit of feedback, because it was just there wasn't so much. Anyway, what I saw was very different from what I saw today.
Hollywood films used to be shown in Denver, San Diego, and one other city where people were very critical, and they would adjust the film according to the reports they got back.
But that was a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was really good. I loved this. I loved this version. Well, I saw it, but it was much longer, and it was